Some things age like fine wine. Some things age like fine milk. But dad jokes never get old. They just become apparent. Hello, everyone. Bront CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are going to talk about the various starters and login champs, at least through the first 70 days here in Raid Shadow Legends. Now, there are a couple of champions, including Khatun you get here on day 30. There's a couple of extra ones you get beforehand. And some of these kits have aged very well. Some of these kits have aged poorly. I am not going to go past the 270 days, but let's go take a look at those various champions, including the 4 starters you get a chance to pick from, and see how good those champions are, both for current game progression, as well as where you could possibly use them in the end game. So first off, we're just going to go over quickly the starters, and I think that Kale is the best overall all-around starter. Now, Kale does a good amount of damage. He doesn't do the most damage. There are certainly other champions that are better in Arena, but the big thing that I think makes Kale useful is the fact that he has a 4-hitter with poisons, as well as he has poisons on his A1. And poisons are some of the best ways to do damage in Clan Boss, some of the best ways to do damage in Dragon, some of the best ways to do damage in Ice Golem, and just gives him a lot of additional utility beyond the fact that he can still be a good champion for campaign farming, for Arena early on, and he just brings enough in his kit that generally makes him the best champion for the starters. That doesn't mean he's the only option for starting as well. If you're looking for pure damage, Elhain is just a little bit better because she has 2 AoE hits. So as a result, she can do wave clear a little bit better than Kale, and the extra AoE hits can be very helpful in Arena as well, and just general wave clear. So overall, that makes her fairly strong as a secondary option to Kale. I still think Kale brings more to the early game than anything else. If we were to look at Athel, Athel has a 3-hitter that can certainly help you in Fire Knight, but overall, I found that she doesn't do as much damage as I might think she might otherwise, despite the fact that she does buff herself, so that makes her less useful. And then Galek is just kind of hard to use. His A3, which does decreased defense, is the weak version of decreased defense with a low accuracy, low chance to land. So you don't really want to build him with accuracy, and his damage, while good, is not so much better than Kale's that you don't make up for it in Kale's poisons. So you can technically start with any of the champions. Any of the starter champions are going to be good champions for you early on. They're worth 6-starring. They're worth being campaign farmers because you can pretty much eventually leave them alone to farm campaign until you get a better campaign farmer. They can be helpful in Arena for you for a while, and they will probably be in Clan Boss for you for a while until you get better champions to put in Clan Boss. So definitely invest in your starter early. Make sure you get your starter to 6-star 60 as quick as possible. It makes a huge, huge difference. But let's go take a look at some of the other login champions. Now, if there is not a special event running where there is a special login champion, Shaman will be the first champion you get from the login events. And Shaman is a reviver, and that's about the extent of which her kit is good. She brings buffs that are not particularly exciting in increased crit rate. Could be very useful early, but it's a single champion on 2 turns on a 4-turn cooldown. It feels more like a waste of a skill than an actual skill it's useful for anyone to really get. She has a shield revive that's not great. It does okay HP and a little bit of shield. 5-turn cooldown on a single target revive. Not very good. She's not going to be doing a lot of damage. You're not going to be building with a lot of accuracy early on, so removing a buff isn't really an option for you either. She does not have a very good kit. She is worth possibly holding on to because she could be good for faction wars if you can't get any of the other revivers, but there are so many good other revivers. If you end up using her for a 4-star chicken, I wouldn't not only not blame you, but I don't think that's the worst use for her for a very beginning starting account because it can help jumpstart you to getting an extra 4-star or 5-star champion. 14 days in, you'll get Jizoh, and Jizoh's okay. His big claim to fame is he's got a 2-hitter here. He's got a provoke. He certainly could be used in Hydra if you're desperate or if you're doing a very early Hydra team. He also places counterattack. He can place it on anybody he wants to. The big problem is that he is dumb. So he doesn't know where to place the skill. He doesn't know when to use the skill. And as a result, different people will have different results with him, and you can't really just let him run it on auto. He doesn't do a lot of good damage, but he is at least a defense champion and does damage based on defense, so he can sort of stick around a little bit and be tanky while doing a little bit of damage. But overall, Jizoh is not super great. I would think about keeping him just because it's nice to hold on to him. But again, if you needed a chicken badly enough, he's not the worst 4-star chicken because there are plenty of better lizards. And honestly, there's a couple rares that I think I'd rather use than Jizoh in faction wards as well. He just doesn't really bring a lot to the table outside of a very niche use as a provoker in Hydra when you're struggling for provokers in Hydra. Now we get to the first really good champion outside of your starters, of course, is we have Khatun. Khatun gives you a speed boost. She gives you a speed aura, 19% in all battles. She can decrease turn meter on enemies and has an AoE as well. That can be very helpful, and has decreased speed on the A1, even if it's a very low level. But honestly, she's super easy to build because early on, especially for Arena, you generally are going to want to build her fast because she's going to be in the lead, and then she boosts everyone else's turn meter up and gives them speed and spurs everyone on to get more turns, act faster, and take over the other team. In Arena, that's a great strategy very early on. In regular content, that still could be a very time-saving and way to speed up your teams, especially when you struggle to get all of the additional stats. Khatun is a very good champion. Do not make her a 4-star chicken. I know it is very tempting, especially in the early game, to struggle. She is worth building up. You don't necessarily even have to make her a 6-star early on, although if you make her a 6-star, she's got pretty good speed. And she will help you in faction wars, basically to the end of time for the most part. She can be very helpful in secret rooms later on in the game. She can be very helpful in things like Doom Tower to speed up your teams. She's not super heavy to invest in. Yes, she is an epic, so epic books may be a problem when you get her, but she only needs the one book. So you've got a 1 in 3 chance of landing that book and that skill once. And once you land it in there, you're golden. You don't need to book her at all anymore. And she's got a better aura than your Apothecary, who's the other champion that's got a very similar kit to her. And she could be very, very good on your account for a long time, particularly in places like 3v3, where you might struggle to get very good leads in Arena. She can be one of your 3 speed champs to help any one of your teams go, even if she's not your best speed champ. So very good champ. Definitely hold on to your Khatun. Well worth it. Now, I've talked about other champions that are just okay, but not great. This is the first actually bad champ that's absolute trash. Yaga the Insatiable is one of the worst epics in the game. He's possibly one of the worst champions in the game. There are rares that are better. There are uncommons that are better than Yaga. Yaga is a poisoner, where you can do poison on his A1, bookable to a 50% chance, which is absolutely gross. And then he's got a double hitter that is a 50% chance, bookable is 75, to place a poison for 2 turns. So he can actually do all his A2 and his A3 and not place poisons, which makes him less useful than Kale. Kale is a better starter for placing poisons. Kale is also going to hit for more damage. His third attack here does more damage if targets are under poisons, but this doesn't hit very hard at all. Your starters hit harder than this with this extra 25% increase in damage. He also takes 18 books. So he is absolutely not worth investing in. He is a good chicken. That's really the best use for him in the game. Do not invest in Yaga. Do not expect to use him. Do not try to use him. He's not worth it. Now, Dark Athel is not a horrible champion, but she's not very good. She's generally bad. Her kit just doesn't make a lot of sense. And in general, she is a damage dealer where your starters tend to deal as much, if not more damage. What she's kind of built for is Spider, particularly with this attack that gives her an extra turn if she kills 10 or more enemies. The problem is the gear required to get this skill to kill that many enemies, let alone the investment in books, the investment in time, the investment in masteries to get her to hit that level of damage is very difficult early on when you're better off just using a starter that you're also using in other places. The amount of resources it takes to get her to do enough to even trigger these things usefully is huge. The fact that you're not always going to have 10 enemies to kill when she takes a turn, so you might miss out just because of that, that's lame as well. And she does have a second AoE here as well that does decrease speed. but overall, she just doesn't do enough damage to really be useful in Spider. She's not great for the wave clear, particularly because she needs to kill at least 6 champions to heal, so this skill only works against Spider. Only works on some of the earlier levels in Spider if you're really absolutely struggling. But by the time you get her 90 days in, you'll have better options in Spider than Dark Athel, and hopefully you'll be maybe even placing burns by then. And if you're not, your starter is still a better champion with other champions around than Dark Athel. Do not invest with her. She might be okay in Faction Wars, but honestly, I wouldn't even invest her much there. Maybe she's a chicken, maybe she's not. Hopefully by here, you won't necessarily be needing to take her as a chicken, but you know, you could do worse than using her as a chicken. I don't think she's got a lot of usefulness to salvage in her kit. That changes, however, for the 120-day login of Dark Elhain. Dark Elhain smacks. She can absolutely nuke. She can be a viable arena nuker in the mid-game when you're struggling to find arena nukers. She can hit harder than your starters. She has abilities that prevent her from getting locked out because if she gets frozen, she just attacks instead, goes off on the enemy team. So you don't have to necessarily build her super fast if you're going to build her for arena. She's also good for countering Torment, which can be rough for early counts. Very good champion overall. She's immune to freeze, which gets her useful in certain situations. Even in the later game, because she does enough damage to be usable, you could certainly use her in some Centranos War challenges. There might be some secret rooms you might be able to build her for or keep her user for as well. There she'll be viable for there. She doesn't really need the books if you're struggling with books. If you can book her, obviously that's additional damage. But her passives give her the ability to do additional damage. Her passives let her go off and absolutely nuke people. And she hits hard enough that she's a viable champion to use. And so not a champion that's a bad investment. And you don't necessarily have to make her a high investment champion to get a lot out of her. So definitely a good champion to very least keep and hold in your back pocket in case you might find a use for her. Maybe if you're struggling for nukers at 120 days, then maybe you'd pull her out. Lordly Legionary, I like to call lousy Legionary. He's definitely not good. He is not quite Yaga the Insatiable level of bad because you can use him unbooked and he's got some use. You can kind of see by the burns that he's got in his arm and this fire stuff. He is a Fire Knight specialist, particularly because he has a double hitter here that can take extra hits, can take even 2 extra hits. So he can do extra hits up to 4, but overall his kit's just not great. He's got a decreased speed, he's got reflect damage and continuous heal on everybody else, 4-turn cooldown. There's not a lot of use for reflect damage in this game other than for the Fire Knight. You know, and if you're struggling in Fire Knight, he could possibly help you, but there are so many other champions that will be a better long-term investment that I would not bother dealing with investing in a Lordly Legionary. Whether or not you decide you want to chicken him because you don't think he's worth ever building, or you want to hold on to him just in case you're struggling in Fire Knight and you got to get desperate. That's up to you. I don't think he's generally worth keeping around for the most part. I don't think he's worth building. He doesn't even do a lot of damage, and it's all single target, which is just not very good. Now, 180 days into the game, you get one of the best login champions in the game in Scyl the Drakes. Scyl the Drakes has this wonderful passive that every time she takes a turn, she heals 10% of everybody's max HP at the start of her turn, and puts increased speed up there as well. She is great when you put her in Relentless gear, because if she takes 2 turns in a row, she's healed your entire team by 20%. If she takes 3 turns in a row, she's healed your entire team by 30%. She gets a bunch of extra increased speeds out there, which can be very helpful. Not the best thing, and she doesn't certainly work in a tight speed tune because of that randomness, but overall, she's a very, very good champion. She also gives you a very good revive 4-turn cooldown, 50% HP, and an ally protection to keep them alive. Could use a little bit of turn meter, but overall it's still a decent revive. She, especially with the fact that she throws all this extra healing out as well. She has a viable stun, 35% chance on a 2-hitter per hit is an over 50% chance to stun at any given time. Very, very helpful, very, very useful, worth booking. It's a 3-turn cooldown AoE. She can actually do some decent amount of damage, although I would not build her for crit rate because I would build her with defense and HP to keep her alive. She is a defense-based champion, but build her with some HP as well because that will help keep her alive as well. And then finally, she has an underrated A1 that can decrease speed and can decrease turn meter. She's actually very, very good against Fire Knight, until you can finally get better champions in Fire Knight and don't need the healer reviver. This turn meter and decreased speed is actually a little more reliable than it looks like. Yes, it's a 40% chance to place decreased speed and a 50% chance of decreasing turn meter. Very good, well worth booking. If you have the books ready to go, you save them up for her when you get 180 days and you book her right away. If not, you work on booking her as you go. Very good champion, can play in a lot of early game stuff for progression, plays very well in the mid game. She basically solves faction wars for you and barbarians, but she also plays in the end game. She plays in Doom Tower Wave Clear. She plays in Centranos. She's actually usable in Hydra early on because she's got an AoE that does some damage, and the healing is very underrated in Hydra as well. And she's a reviver. So she is a very good champion. She's a champion you will probably use for the rest of your account's life in various random situations you wouldn't have thought about otherwise, because she's very flexible, because she's a defense-based champion that's also a reviver. So make sure you build her out. Your account will be better for it. Unfortunately, we're back onto the bad end of champions when we're talking about Tanix Hateflower. She is the 210-day login. She is not absolutely horrible, and she has a passive that allows her to basically soak up 5% of damage that everyone else is taking. That is very helpful for keeping your team alive if you're absolutely struggling with keeping your team alive. It's basically a way to have some passive damage protection for the rest of your team. You put her in something that helps heal her, keeps her alive, and she slowly but surely mitigates some of the damage your team takes. But that's really about all of where she's super useful. She's got a single target decreased speed, and she's got a double hitter that heals her if somebody's under decreased speed. Well, she has to place that decreased speed because there's not a lot of extra decreased speed in Demon Spawn. So if she's not placing it, then she's not really healing with this A1. And it's a bunch of single target damage, and it's just kind of okay. And on top of that, this damage is attack based, whereas you're going to want to build her tanky because she's going to be taking a lot of damage. So Tanix Hateflower, probably not worth investing in, but she's not so terrible that I would instantly feed her to somebody else. I would probably hold on to her to make sure you can get through Faction Wars, because if you have to invest in her for Faction Wars 21, well, getting through Faction Wars 21 gets you Lydia, who's a great champion. Day 240, we get Grush the Mangler. And Grush the Mangler is actually probably one of the more underrated login champions in the game. He's got an AoE with throws continuous heals out there. Now, that can depend on whether or not he crits, but, you know, he gets a bunch of continuous heals out there. That's extra healing. That doesn't suck. He can get this to a 4-turn cooldown. Not bad for an epic. He also has this 5-turn AoE that can be booked to a 4-turn that does increase attack. That does decrease attack and decrease crit damage. Now, decreased crit damage is not super amazing when people are only critting 15% of the time, but the decreased attack will usually decrease the amount of damage you're taking. And then on top of that, he's got a leech on the A1 that he'll throw up beforehand, so he can help keep himself alive. He actually does a very good amount of damage, and he's even got, say, Faction Crypt's 30% defense aura, which is very useful for the Ogryn. So you get good damage, good healing, good support debuffs. He's not great at anything is the biggest problem with his kit, and the fact that you get him so late in the game at day 240, you may end up not needing to invest in him. But if you're struggling with Ogryn Faction Wars and you get Grush, Grush is worth investing in for the additional damage and support. And he's very useful, therefore, in secret rooms as well, because again, he can hit very hard and he brings a bunch of the extra healing and support. It is really hard to find champions that both do damage and give you a lot of good support, and Grush is capable of doing both, even if he's not top tier at either. And finally, on the 270-day path, we have Visix the Unbowed. Visix is absolutely amazing, but she used to be really, really bad. She got a buff well before I started playing back in 2021, but She was horrible, and now she's amazing. Now, she's not the best at anything in her class, but you've got an A1 that's a double hitter that can steal turn meter effectively because it decreases turn meter of the target and fills hers by the same amount the target lost. So she's effectively stealing it. It's just not worded very well. She does need the books, and that is one of the frustrating things about her. She definitely needs the books on all of her abilities to function, but she functions very well. This is great for Fire Knight. In fact, I used this for Fire Knight 25 for a long time before I progressed into hard, before I managed to get an Allure who does a good job of filling in for her as well. So she's a very useful champion in Fire Knight. She has a decreased speed and an ally protect. The ally protect is great for keeping the rest of your champions alive. Decreased speed is great for keeping the other team from taking a turn. It's one of the most underrated debuffs in the game, in my opinion. She actually can do a decent amount of damage, although as an ally protector, I would not build her with a lot of crit damage, but you build her with a bunch of defense, have her go fast, go first, she can actually do a decent amount of damage with this AoE. And finally, she's got a provoke that puts a huge shield on her as well. This is based off of her max HP, so while as a defense-based champion, she does need some HP to not only stay alive, but with that ally protection, she can certainly take a bunch of damage on your team as well. But she keeps your team alive. She's a champion that is generally better on your team than an underrated, because while her kit may not always look like it's the best kit in the world, the provoke controls a bunch of people. The ally protection prevents you from getting attacked and mitigates some of your damage. The shield helps mitigate some of her damage. The turn meter control helps control. The decreased speed helps control. She is all about control. And in fact, if you can partner her and Scyl the Drakes, you can pretty much control an awful lot of the Doom Tower waves if you're fast enough, between either provoking them or stunning them, and then keeping Visix alive with your Scyl, and you're all set. Visix is also very good in Hydra because this provoke is a 1-turn provoke on a 3-turn cooldown, but being an AoE means that it's always going to hit the heads that need provoke, and since it also does an okay amount of damage, it's going to just help you turn out more damage in Hydra as well. And that's one of the things that actually made Visix continue to be a good champion in the game worth investing, is because for entry-level Hydra, she's great. I still use Visix on my account to this day on my hard team because she does enough as a provoker and does enough with everything else to make her super valuable on that hard team. That is all of the login champions, or at least up to day 270. There are a couple of champions you can get fragments for that become a lot harder to get to. So it takes you 4 months to get some of the next legendaries. It takes you 2 months then to get some of the epics. And if you want me to do a video on those and go over some of those, I certainly can do so. But hopefully you got a chance to take a look at some of these champions, review them, learn which ones are actually worth holding on to and using, which ones have uses in the late game, and which ones are absolute trash that you can avoid to feed into champions that will be better to help your account more. So hope this helps. I appreciate you guys hanging around. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for hanging out. I'll talk to you later. I'm Bront CatHerder.